The backstories of most vision wielders are commonly tinged with some tragedy. It's often that individuals who carry visions have had to fight tooth and nail to be recognized as worthy of one. Some experience the death of a loved one, while others face insurmountable challenges other humans would just find impossible. There is one person, however, that was forced to experience an extreme level of hardship that ultimately changed her, destroying any sense of self she once had. What's even more unfortunate is that as far as the fates are concerned, her suffering is far from over. This individual is the divine damsel of devastation, Shenhe. Before we explore her lore, if you want to see more Genshin Impact content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Most vision wielders often experience the trial of getting a vision later in their life. There are a handful, however, that have had to experience this hardship much earlier. Shenhe is one such person. In the past, Shenhe used to belong to a family of exorcists. Both her parents were in the business and they were even related to the family Chongyun is from. Sadly, Shenhe's mother died when she was really young, supposedly due to an illness. This caused her father to essentially lose his mind from the grief and left for about a year in search of some way to bring his wife back. I'm sure you are familiar with what happens when you attempt to do this. Trying to bring someone back almost always never works, but nevertheless, when Shenhe's father thought he had found the answer, he ecstatically returned home. As soon as he arrived, he took Shenhe and told her he had a surprise. They went to a cave deep in the mountains, and it is here that he told Shenhe she would reunite with her mother. You see, what her father had found was a secret art or ritual called fate transference. We now know that fate is not an easy thing to change, but what the ritual supposedly allowed one to do was to switch the fates between two people. The price to overturn death, however, is often very steep. In order to bring his wife back, there had to be an exchange of flesh. So whoever was sacrificed would die, and the soul of the target recipient would instead inhabit the body of the sacrifice, thereby transferring or exchanging their fates. Of all the people her father could have chosen, it was his own daughter who would unfortunately bear this suffering. In his grief-ridden and deranged state, her father summoned forth a being that was described as a Seelie. However, the thing that appeared in the cave was the furthest thing from a Seelie. It was described as a black Seelie with glowing red eyes that, upon appearing, affixed its view to Shenhe, overcome with an intense hunger for her life force. Just in case it slipped your mind, Shenhe at this time was just a child. A child that wasn't trained in any exorcism art from her parents nor any sort of martial arts. She was pretty much defenseless save for an exorcism dagger she always had with her, an heirloom left over from her mother. Now, before we continue with this story, we need to take a bit of a detour. It's important, so bear with me. Fortune telling is something quite common in Teyvat, and each region has its own variant. Mona, for example, uses a combination of hydromancy and astrology to make predictions, while in Sumeru, they interpret dreams in order to gain insight into an individual's potential future. In Liyue, there are two known signs of bad luck people often try to avoid: the solitary star and the disastrous evil. The first indicated that one would eventually live alone, bereft of any friends or family, while the second indicated the amount of hardship and perils a person would face. When Cloud Retainer carried out a reading ceremony on a much older Shenhe, not only was her fate marked by both these signs, but she was also said to be haunted by intense homicidal urges. So why is this important? Well, as Shenhe faced down this Seelie or demon or whatever it was her father had summoned, something in her broke. I suppose it must have been due to the overwhelming fear and panic she was experiencing, or perhaps it was the realization that her father had left her for dead. But despite all these emotions, her will to live was overcoming all of them. At that point, all she really wanted to do was to survive and live. It's mentioned that in this moment, all the calamitous and disastrous things that would befall her, along with the intense urge for violence, all broke out at once. It's not clear what this entails exactly, as it could be read in a way that meant she broke her limit as a human, or perhaps there was some supernatural effect at play. Regardless of what really happened, it allowed Shenhe to go toe-to-toe with this monster and fighting it to a complete stalemate. The battle lasted for days and there was no end in sight, until the gods looked upon her in favor. It was at this moment that Shenhe received a vision, and from then on, the scales had tipped. She was able to use this newfound power to completely destroy the beast and survive, though the battle had taken everything out of her. Several days later, as she was tracking the faint remnants of evil energies, Cloud Retainer came upon this cave and found Shenhe lying inside, and out of pity, saved her. From then on, Shenhe would live and train under the tutelage of her new master, Cloud Retainer, learning how to harness both her vision and training in the adaptal arts. But it's not a happy ending though. Why would it be? You see, despite being saved by Cloud Retainer after her experience in the cave, Shenhe was irreparably changed and damaged. It's not as though her fate had been altered. She was still subject to the disastrous evil and solitary star and now was seemingly cursed with intense and violent urges. In order to remedy this, her soul had to be bound and suppressed using the red ropes of fate, an adaptai tool. It would effectively hold back and restrain the evil fates wishing to take hold of her and the violent tendencies she now has. Unfortunately, it came with a side effect of also suppressing most, if not all, of her emotions. Now, why such an extreme control measure, you ask? Well, whenever her urges become too much to handle, Shenhe is known to go completely ballistic. Her strength is so immense that she can rip out entire trees and leave craters in the ground with nothing but her bare hands. Suffice to say, if she were ever to lose control of herself, many around her would likely end up hurt or even worse. This is why she still secludes herself in the adaptai abodes and always uses these red ropes. Functionally, she cannot experience being truly human simply because she was fated to suffer this way. It's extremely tragic that an individual such as her has little respite given the fact she has suffered since a very young age. The Shenhe we know today though is slightly better off. While she still has to use the red ropes and is pretty much more adaptai than human, she has learned to build relationships and more importantly, control her violent urges. It still does pop up from time to time, but not at a point that she endangers others unless severely provoked. I have often wondered what exactly happened to the thing she had fought in the cave so many years ago. Did she truly kill something otherworldly, or was it in fact a dead god remnant? The homicidal tendencies and exposure to this thing seems like there are parallels to Kolei's story when she was first implanted with god miasma, with the god constantly wanting to take over her body or force her to do heinous things. So I am inclined to believe it was an ancient god, though I can't be sure 100%. But suppose that it was a completely different thing. It makes the mystery even more interesting as it implies a supernatural part of Tevat we have yet to explore but have often been hinted at. Maybe the fate exchanging ritual really had succeeded, only instead of bringing her mother back, it exchanged their fates, forcing Shenhe to now carry the burden of her mother's original fate. With her mother being an exorcist, perhaps long-term exposure created similar circumstances to karma corruption the Yaksha faced when killing demons, and her mother died due to this. Whatever the case may be, Shenhe's tale is unfortunate and filled with tragedy. It's sad that if this fate was decided for her, that she would be forced to suffer through it regardless of her choices. In the most unfortunate way, she does live up to her epithet of the divine damsel of devastation. That brings this video to an end, and if you enjoyed it, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. As usual, have a nice day.